Hi there, welcome to another Murphy's Minutes, and today's Murphy's Minutes is coming from on top of a hill, again a hill, not a Kreuzberg but the Müggelberg. And this story is all about the GDR's pride and joy. But now, this story is weird, and I'm going to try and explain to you what this story is all about. We climbed all the way up to this hill to look at this building, which you see behind me. It's a, well, not so exhilarating building from the first glance of it. Right? At first glance, it's just one of those research buildings that, well, it's built to, I don't know, spy on people or check on the weather. So this building is not there to spy. Actually, it was there to impress. Well, if you look at it now, it's not much of an impressive building. But at one time, it was the pride and joy of the GDR. They started with the whole planning of it in the 1950s, the early 1950s. And you have to imagine that in these days, right after the Second World War, the GDR was moving away from the Bundesrepublik of Germany. So you had West and the East. And the East wanted to show them that they were technically in a far more advanced state than the West. They were actually able to plan grand and grandiose construction plans. One of them was a television tower, a huge television tower that they could use to project their own image of the world via their GDR television channels to the rest of the world. Now this television tower had to be huge, had to be high, and they planned that thing to be the highest tower in Europe. But to do that, they needed to cheat a little. As usual, the GDR had to cheat a little, but they did it to build on top of this hill. So including the height of the hill, the height of the tower would be the highest tower in Europe. So the location itself was ideal. And as they started construction, they built the first level of the building, spent about 1.6 million Ostmark to build that building. And as they celebrated themselves and patted themselves on the back for a job well done, somebody noticed that it was right in the flight path of the new to be built international hub airport of Schönefeld. So as they continued their project, they knew they had to find an alternative location. So they either had to relocate the airport, which is not very easy, or to relocate the tower, which was cheaper. So they abandoned this construction site and made it look like they're making some sort of a weather station or something else. Anyway, to, well, hide the fact that they just lost 1.6 million Ostmark in a time that they were still rebuilding a country after a very devastating war. You can imagine that the taxpayers weren't actually happy. And their second location was actually an empty plot of land right in the middle of Berlin, on the island of Berlin, where Berlin literally originated from, because they blew up the old Schloss, the old palace of the emperor. And on that location, they knew they had to build something prestigious. And what is more prestigious than a television tower? Now, as they started their construction there, they found out that Berlin comes from actually the word in Old Saxish of dry lying swamp. We cannot pronounce that word, but it's a swamp. It's a dry swamp. So if you want to buy a 1,000 feet high tower on a dry swamp, it's going to lean over like Pisa. And all the construction engineers said, if you're going to build it there, this is going to be extremely expensive because all these measures have to be taken to make sure that this tower will remain upright. So they chose yet another location. And so this time they found a location very near to the second location, the third location, which was Alexanderplatz. Of course, an imperial history on this place because it was the entry place where Alexander the Great visited Berlin, and they named it in his honor. And the socialists wanted to do away with this royal and imperial history of the place, so they built their huge television tower there. And you have this image, this old footage of Walter Ulbricht saying, "Man sieht doch gerade, da gehört hin," or something down that line. I don't know exactly what he said, because he also had this funny voice.
Liebe Freunde und Genossen.
And as they started to build this, in the meantime, very much cursed piece of construction, it turned out to be actually the staple of Berlin. Now everybody remembers Berlin by that television tower. It is the most famous building in all of Berlin, maybe after Brandenburg Gate. Go! It's cold, and we're here in a square with three bearded ladies. Of course, those are Marx and Engels. Those are the inspiration for the GDR. And since this is a sort of like a topic about how the GDR actually makes itself look more important than any other German rulers in history, they also wanted to show in the middle of their city the Hauptstadt der DDR, so the capital city of the German Democratic Republic, who actually is the main influence here. And the main influence, of course, is this modernism. It's everything about looking forward, looking towards the future. And this is why all the socialist architecture actually is of a sort of like minimalist, modernist, brutalist nature. Now, this typical GDR construction, or statue behind me, is also a sign of that. But if you look around on this main square, you either see very modern architecture or Prussian architecture, which means none of the old socialist buildings have survived. Literally none of them. That means the old Palast der Republik is gone. The views, the whole architectural game you saw with the big buildings, the big streets, parked cars, they were all part of the socialist ideal architecturally. And none of that has survived, none of it. They all removed everything, every old trace of the GDR, which I think is a total shame, because in its architecture, even the Palast der Republik was a very gorgeous building, not to mention the fact that it was extremely expensive. The only thing you could say that might have remained is, of course, this well-beloved square, which we all know by the name of Alexanderplatz, which is right beyond this statue. You see it by its, international marker, the Telespargel. So they chose this sandbank on the outer side of the River Spree, where they thought building on a sandbank would be a wise idea, because sand, of course, is a very sound constructural material, unless it's saturated with water. Well, the rest is a swamp, the river is right next door, so what do you think? The sandbank would be saturated with water? I think so. And so did they. They found out that as they were building this beautiful tower, that it was standing on saturated sand. And that has a very big disadvantage. It works as follows. Have you ever noticed that when you're walking through the surf of a beach, and if the water rushes over the sand and it retreats, actually the sand right around your feet is dry. So if you stick your fingers in the sand around your fingers will dry up. Now this trick they used here, and we'll show that when we're a little bit closer towards the building. So the weird situation here is that the square actually runs down instead of uphill. Usually a church is built on some sort of a hill so it doesn't flood, but in this situation the surrounding area is higher than the church itself. You have to take steps down to the church, and if you then move towards Alexanderplatz, you see that it actually goes up You have to go up the steps towards this new modernist socialist building. And now I told you about these fingers in the surf, right? In the sand, to make the sand go dry. You see those triangles? Those are actually wings and aerofoils of a sort of like spaceship that they build around Sputnik being launched up into the air. Those aerofoils, they function as sort of like these fingers in the surf. They dry out the sand and make the sand stable enough to carry this 368 meter high tower going all the way up. So yeah, this is how they succeeded in their architectural marvel.